Hey everybody, my name is Andrew Davis and you are watching Conversations in Pop Culture, brought to you by my sponsor, Mixum Printing, the smarter way to print. Printing your creative project can be confusing and stressful, but Mixum is here to make it easy. From their instant quote calculator that lets you get as many quotes as you want for free, to their 24-hour customer service support, Mixum is here to make sure your printing experience runs smoothly from start to finish. And you can choose from a range of premium printing options and materials, and the company has also printed many successful Kickstarter campaigns. A bunch of them you have heard on this very show, and everybody who uses Mixum is extremely happy with them, and they know because Mixum does an amazing job. And many of you, and obviously when you back a bunch of Kickstarters, I guarantee you've received some Mixum comic printed stuff out there. So obviously they offer a lot of services, and they offer services in the United States, Canada, Australia, and the UK, and Mixum can print and reach your audience around the world. So if you're ready to print smarter, not harder, head over to Mixum.com, and right now they're running a promotion where listeners of the show can drop my name, Andrew Davis, in the message tab of a current order and get 5% discount on their first order. And I know when you're running a Kickstarter, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it at some point in this interview, that every percentage point matters when you're trying to reach your goal, because the more money you have for your comic and in your pocket, the more goals you can push out there. And so that is Mixam.com. Again, type my name, Andrew Davis, in the message tab of your current order to receive 5% off your first order. And I have with me returning guest Ben Lacy. So welcome back to the show, man.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I've got my own special guest here, my own shark puppet.
Well, hopefully I won't get eaten. Let's leave it at that. I prefer not to get attacked by a shark today. That is tomorrow's activity. You know, Thursdays are my day off, and I tend to prefer to get eaten by a shark on Thursday, so I can at least finish this interview and survive and do something good. So obviously joking around, and you have a shark with you, and we're talking about Shark of War issue 4, and I believe it launched yesterday.
Yes, yesterday morning. And it's actually Shark of War 1 through 4. If you haven't gotten it yet, you don't have to worry about catching up. All the back issues are there, so you can catch all 4 issues.
And now, obviously, we spoke, and I think we spoke earlier this year, or
possibly, yeah. It was either early. It was either in my third issue 1 through 3 or my issue 1 through 2. I'm not sure which. I think it might have been this past. You know, just when I was doing 1 through 3.
Every day seems the same. February seems like it was 10 years ago. I'm not going to pretend. March seems like it was 10 years ago. Hell, May seems like it was 10 years ago. And so obviously we spoke about Shark of War before. We went through a bunch of stuff. I think we spoke, and issue 3 was coming out. But I do want to catch up everybody on what Shark of War is, because it's a very interesting comic, from the art to the story about what's going on. And so for those who are hearing about it for the first time, or might have forgotten, because obviously it's been a while and I had to reread the first 3 issues, and then issue 4 you sent me, which was helpful. So what is Shark of War, and what's the basic premise of it?
Shark of War is basically, in sales pitch, would be Jaws meets RoboCop. Jaws if the shark were the hero, RoboCop if the cop were a shark. He's an escaped U.S. military experiment who's on the loose. He's been programmed as part of the military's experiment to enforce U.S. law, and he's doing that in the sharkiest way possible up and down the eastern seaboard. He starts interfering with some powerful mob cartels. They hire his creator to take him out. They almost succeed, but they don't quite succeed. And now in issue 4, he's been upgraded. He's bigger, stronger, faster, with bigger guns, and he's really hacked off. So that's where we kind of join in issue 4. I think everybody will enjoy it. It's both, humorous, over the top, and it's got some deeper, sci-fi kind of concepts in it that I think, sci-fi fans and horror fans will really find it interesting.
And so I want to dive a little bit into it and give a little bit more meat into this, because obviously, the drug cartel sort of takes a boy and his shark and his 9-year-old sort of develop a very special bond between each other. And then that boy gets reunited with his sister. And obviously, after, the attack, obviously the shark sort of returns back there, and there's that going in there. And so this shark has some allies in
Yeah.
that regard. And it's also really cool because we do get, this idea of, I guess, nature and us playing a little bit of the God card with modifying a shark, interacting with humans, and also right versus wrong. There's a lot of stuff going on. And so even where did this idea come from? Because there's a lot of moving parts, and obviously we also have, the evil mad scientist in play in a lot of ways. And well, a lot of drug stuff does happen from Central America and South America into the U.S. and any place that's a big, port city is going to be drug oriented. And we're going to dive further into this. I promise. Because
Yeah.
we're going to talk about issue 3 heavily.
Oh yeah, there's a montage where he's taking down drug smugglers, human traffickers, gun runners, a whole slew of bad guys that are using the ocean transport. The idea came from I saw the movie The Meg a few years back, and I was thinking about something to write, and I was like, the shark would be a lot more exciting if he could go out of the water in a more realistic fashion. And I came up with a sci-fi short story. That was what it was going to be, called The Jetpack Shark. And it was basically be a shark with a jetpack. And as more I thought about it, is like, well, I think this would work really well as a comic book. So that's kind of how it evolved into the comic book that you're reading now. And I kind of went into a lot more detail on, the ideas and how it came about. And I wanted to capture some of that same dark humor you see in the first RoboCop movie, where they're experimenting on humans in that case to make the RoboCop. And so some of that same dark humor hopefully is seeping through here. But at the same time, the shark is your point of view character, and he is your hero in this story, which is another thing I wanted to flip the script on, because every shark movie you see, the shark is somehow the villain or the monster, which is kind of unrealistic, frankly, but that people just use them as a scare tactic, and I wanted to go beyond that.
And what's really actually so funny is that, I don't know if you know this, but obviously The Meg, the guy who adapted the graphic novel is J.S. Hurls, and he was on my show a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
So he did the graphic novel based off the book versus the movie, but it's super, super interesting. And obviously, even going into this, which is super interesting as well, is that obviously this shark, which is Ganasher is his name, I think.
Yeah, Nasher is this G being silent is usually how I pronounce it. But yeah, Nasher is how he's been dubbed is given his code name by the Navy.
And what's so interesting for those who don't know is that international law with water is that it's 3 miles. So if you're born in 3 miles of a country, typically you are of that citizenship, especially in the U.S. So if you're born on a cruise ship or you're 3 miles from Florida, you are a U.S. citizen. It is counted. And then up to 9 miles outside of that, it's not international waters where that water is patrolled. But if you go 12 miles and 5 feet over, you are in international water. And so it's very interesting that this shark is patrolling, because I'm under the assumption that he's not patrolling 50 miles out.
Well, he goes where he wants, and his programming isn't like, care about international boundaries. His programming is to enforce the U.S. military will, and he's interpreted that the way he wants to. He has an artificial intelligence that's been embedded in him, and his own intelligence is heightened, and they kind of work together and decide what to do within these parameters. But he basically is a shark vigilante to some degree.
And to speak about that, because you're an engineer by trade, and not to get too personal, but you've done a lot of space engineering and aerospace things, I think. And obviously, this shark is very much, there's a lot of stuff where his food sort of turns into fuel, and the entire cybernetics and the fact that his brain was amplified and they cut into his brain, and that obviously he has a computer with, you know, almost like a second brain and all this stuff that's been done, and how things convert into fuel, which then allows him to use rocket packs and jet packs, and he's got guns, and then obviously he is still a shark and all that stuff. And so what was that like? And he has almost like almost like a, I guess, a half hybrid shark metabolism with a fuel converter, for lack of a better word. I'm sure you're going to explain it better than I am.
Yeah, actually, if you get the issues, you know, the digital versions of the issues, in the back of each one, I have a science of the shark of war, where I explain how his fueling works and how his engines work, how he stays afloat with all that metal attached to him. This issue, I'm going to explain how his guns work, because, you know, they don't work like regular guns, because he's, you know, carrying bullets like that would weigh him down too much. So there's always a science aspect I try to figure out. I worked a lot in fuel reforming, where you make you turn gases into hydrogen for use in fuel cells or other machines. So I use some of that technology to conceptualize how the shark could be made to do what he does.
And the reason why I bring all of this up is because too often I feel in comics we get away from, you know, hard science and what can actually be possible, or we go 15 steps away instead of going 2 steps away. And I think that's something that, for people who say, hey, look, I want something that is a little bit out of boundary, but it's not too far away. Like, I'm not saying we can go modify a shark at the moment, but we do have sophisticated AIs. You know, there are weapons out there that are beyond sophisticated, that are out there, like a weapon like Poseidon, for instance. And Poseidon is a very, very high-powered nuke weapon that can creep along the ocean for years and lay dormant. It's a very terrifying weapon. It's the idea that we're at that stage where this shark isn't so far out of the norm. And I think when I'm reading other sci-fi, we're traveling to Mars in like 5 minutes. And so what was that like to really keep this in actual real grounds in a lot of ways? Because that's something that attracts me to this book.
I think that was, for me, a lot of fun. I you know, a lot of times sci-fi grates on me because I do have a science background. So if the science is totally ludicrous, I kind of like spot it, and I don't really like that. So having that in there, I thought makes it, you know, it's an over-the-top story in a lot of ways, but having that grounding in there, I think, makes it a lot more valuable. On a deeper level, you know, I wanted to, for example, you know, a lot of fiction, the AI, whenever AI is involved, it's like they turn into monsters like the Terminator, they want to kill us, you know, or alternatively, we're abusing them, like in the iRobot series or things like that. And my view is a little different. I'm viewing it more as the AI will be us. You know, we'll like the shark. We will be, you know, eventually have things implanted in us potentially that will, you know, make us partly the AI, because I think that's a lot more realistic than expecting some Terminator robot to walk down the street, because you're already seeing it with your smartphone. Right now it's in your hand. Someday maybe it'll be implanted in your head when you're a baby, and you'll have your own computerized brain basically interacting with you. And that's kind of what, you know, Shark of War has in it in the background, is some of that not only the shark character, but there's a scientist who is killed early on, and he comes back later on in the story, and he's similar to that. And we're seeing a lot of that playing out, where it's a merger of human and AI together.
And I think it even goes further than that, because it's also the idea that, you know, you're modifying something, and that to some degree, you know, you're, you know, I guess, and I hate to, you know, use the term because it has somewhat of a religion connotation to it, but you're playing God in a lot of ways, and you're messing with nature, and that you're creating not necessarily a new species, but you're modifying something. You're playing with a creature and doing something that shouldn't be done in a lot of ways. And there's a whole issue of, well, you know, they wanted to create this Nasher for the use to deal with drug cartels, engage in rescue missions, deal with enemy combatants,
Yeah, that was their main purpose, really,
And
is to fight enemy people. And there was some history. In real life, there's been some history where people have tried. There's been some experimentation with the idea of using dolphins for finding mines. I think the Russians had an
it's so
experiment
interesting
with
you
sharks.
bring that up. I'm actually reading a book and I'm writing the review where dolphins were used for detecting mines after the Atlanta bombing. When the Republican National Committee in California had their thing in '96, they used dolphins to protect the harbor. Dolphins have been trained to shoot C2 darts into enemy combatants to create an embolism and kill them instantly. And dolphins have been used as creatures in war. And the government lost sort of cases on it because they couldn't publicly acknowledge it. And those cases were ultimately like appealed in a private court. And it's so interesting. And all that stuff is now starting to come out. It's four-legged creatures or four-legged friends, the graphic novel. I'm writing a review on it right now, and it's so interesting because obviously when we get into aquatic creatures and all that stuff, I mean, it's just so interesting where we're going with this. And then we have to go to the flip side where obviously Nasher is sort of in an explosion that kills his main creator and the scientist that wasn't abusing him. And then we go to Brooke Douglas and Dr. Brooke Douglas. And well, she has the opposite of Nasher, which is the piranhas. And obviously, if you've seen a bunch of movies, there's always the killer piranhas. If you look at, James Bond, there's obviously the scene.
Yeah, I remember now you mention it. Yeah, I always like to throw some callbacks to classic, horror tropes and hopefully present them in new ways. And when I was thinking of what would be a cool thing to have as an antagonist that could potentially take the shark down, hordes of piranha were part of it. I'm glad you brought up, by the way, the religion and the morality, because I think issue 4 kind of really gets into that a little bit, because series heroine, the story heroine Marissa, the sister of the boy who becomes his friend, has been horrified about this the whole time, and she's a very religious person. In issue 4, she finally gets to express her anger about the whole thing and point out the immorality of it.
It's also very interesting because in issue 1 we get introduced, and I'm a huge wrestling fan, and this is something that I think is going to play right into what we're talking about with morality, where we're really building out the character. And in issue 1 we get introduced to Nasher and what sort of happened. Issue 2 we get the fight, and issue 3 we get this entire sense to even go further onto the other side of morality with these drug cartels and how they're ruthless. And now without Nasher preventing them and being aggressive towards them and stopping them and being a counterbalance, they are just going on a complete power drive without any morality or even just complete greed. And obviously Dr. Brooke Douglas is with the cartel leader, and they're taking over ships and bringing in more ships and creating more of these piranhas and trying to take out the Navy Coast Guard, the Navy, and all that stuff. And so what was that like, really creating that? Because it really does play to this idea that, and it elevates a lot of, Nasher's morality of wanting to, protect people and protect the innocent and go up against evil. And then we have this evil force. And then we also get in issue 4, Marissa's very upset with the idea that we just destroyed this shark's life, that had didn't want this. And a lot, I mean, we don't know if the shark wanted it or not, but I'm assuming the shark didn't ask for it.
No, of course.
That's some guts to me, guys. Like,
yeah, the what happens with Brooke Douglas is she has kind of an evolution from being kind of an arrogant neurosurgeon, to where she's basically becoming more and more corrupted, to the point where she's basically evolving into the Shark of War universe's first supervillain, the Lex Luthor of the Shark of War universe, if you will. And meanwhile, the cartels, who've kind of operated I mean, they operate somewhat publicly, but they operate in shadows because, that's where they can make the most money. And they can, cause trouble in certain countries. They're limited by what they can get away with. And they know that. But now they have this technological advantage that she's brought to them. And they're deciding to push the boundary. They're no longer going to just, sneak their drugs in or sneak around military, police forces and military forces. They're now thinking maybe we can, take over. And it's kind of like, if you look at like DC comic books, they've gotten further along where the supervillains are actually trying to take over, and there's like criminal cartels that can challenge the government. And this is the kind of the mini version of that in the Shark of War universe.
I view it sort of interesting where we have Marissa on one side of being in really good morality, and then we have these cartels on the other. And then obviously Marissa's very, very shocked and appalled by what has happened to this shark, even though she wants to help this shark and she chooses to and bring him to this base. And we have this entire cartel that just wants greed and wants to now operate in the public and oppose anybody who gets rid of anybody who opposes them so they could do their business. And then that really raises a question of Nasher's position. Well, Nasher wants revenge on Brooke, but it's also the idea that Nasher goes and saves a soldier, and that it's all this stuff despite everything that's happened. Nasher has a very different morality than either one of them, and it creates such an interesting situation because now we have a shark, and I don't know if animals can have morality per se, have capabilities of it, but now this shark does. And it's so interesting when we dive into this because it raises questions about what AI does. It raises questions about, can an animal feel? Can an animal actually have a sense of that? And is it the AI or is it the animal? And how much influence do these two forces have on this creature along with its AI? And it's so interesting. It's such a good question. And I don't know the answer to it. And I'm actually pondering it, reading it. And I was reading the entire thing with issue 4. That's my question.
Yeah, I've been thinking of, I'm trying to think how a shark would think. And one of the things I've really tried to avoid is making him like too human-like just because he's smart, because normally when you see, cartoons with animals in it, they're basically humans who look like animals. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, all those things, they're humans that have, animal features and maybe a little bit of, but he's a shark. And I'm trying to think, what would a shark who's smart think like, and what level of emotion and what would his thoughts be, and slowly I've kind of, he's developing at least some human-like emotions just because he's intelligent enough to comprehend. He knows that somebody's hurt him, and he knows that he should be angry about that because he's been hurt. He remembers it. If an animal gets hurt, they probably don't remember it a day later. I mean, they might have some reflexive flinching, for example, or something like that. If you beat an animal, that after a while, I think they respond. They respond. Yeah, they respond to it, but they're not like intellectualizing. They don't understand it. He now understands it. And so he's starting to develop some emotions that are related to human. But on the other hand, he's not a human. There's at one point where, he casually kills an animal, a cute animal that really upsets the little boy who's his friend. And the shark's like, what are you getting upset about? I eat these animals. This is what I eat. This is what I do. And because the boy runs off in tears, and it's meant to be a little bit of a funny scene, but I think it gives some insight into how he's a shark. His values are different than a human. He's going to eat cute animals. He doesn't care that they're cute. Whereas we're going to be like, oh no, he ate that cute animal. So that's kind of one of the things I threw in there. And actually, it's kind of funny that I did a little story here in my Shark of War issue 1 Kickstarter. I actually had people, I had this little picture of the shark chasing a baby seal, and I said, I'm going to have my backers vote on what happens next, and and then I'm going to illustrate it for you. And I'm like, does he eat the seal, or does he not eat the seal? And to my, I fully expected that people backing a shark comic book would vote, have him eat the seal, have him eat the seal. But to my surprise, by like 3-1, people were like, the seal escapes. And I'm like, oh, really? that changed. So I drew this sketch where the seal gets away and the shark gets mad about it because he knows it's been a trickeration. But I'm kind of interested to see how my backers are going to respond when they see this issue where the animal does not get away.
So I'm assuming it's a different seal.
Yeah, it's somewhat. It's a seal.
So a quick aside, and then we'll sort of get into issue 4 a little bit, and even continue on this point because I think it's so interesting. What is that like to actually allow your backers to vote on certain things, and obviously, understand what's going on with the shark, and then illustrating it and paying attention to your backers? Because I think it's really important that comic creators reward their backers in a variety of ways. I just threw out a poll saying what are the best stretch goals, and that's one way to reward your backers. And there's been a lot of different responses on my Facebook group, and so I'm super curious how you feel about that, and also giving a lot of choice, because I like when a comic creator gives me the ability to vote. What print do you want? If I have 5 covers, I'm willing to print one of these prints. All of you who back this get to vote on what everybody gets. And I've seen people do that. And I think it's very important, to let your audience have at least some say in what gets created on a Kickstarter.
Yeah, I definitely look at what my audience wants in terms of rewards and things. I don't let them influence the story at all. That, like I said, I was a little concerned with that when I saw the results of that issue 1 vote, and because I'd already written issue 4. I hadn't drawn it, but I'd written it, and I was like, well, they're going to be upset because I'm not changing it, because I think that's the right thing to happen in issue 4 to illustrate the differences between the shark and a human, a smart shark and a human. So I stuck to it, and I put it in there. And like I said, I hope nobody's too upset, but that's just, that's the art of the story. In terms of, voting, I often have and one other Kickstarter, I had a little animation I made where the shark was chasing Baby Yoda. And I asked them what they would like to see happen next, and I let them nominate different things. And the winning, there was like 6 different choices. The only choice where Baby Yoda gets eaten was one I put in. all the suggestions were something else. But the winner was somebody. I was shocked that it won. Baby Yoda snatches up an octopus and throws it at the shark and gets away. So I wound up making a little cartoon where Baby Yoda snatches up an octopus, throws it at the shark, and while the shark eats that, Baby Yoda flies away. So that was a little special backer bonus. In fact, I usually show that animation off every now and then because it's kind of fun to do.
And then obviously the only reason why I brought that up is because obviously I think it's really important. And it was just perfect that you brought it up also, and that I think it is super important that, to some degree, backers have choices in a lot of this stuff that's out there. And then obviously going into issue 4, because issue 1, we get introduced to Nasher. Issue 2, he gets his ass kicked. Issue 3, he heals. And we sort of see this doctor, and we get into a lot of the morality and, the cartel sort of taking over. And then issue 4, we see Nasher back.
Yeah.
And obviously we see him, rescuing, Calder, who's an ensign, obviously being back in the water, upgraded. And also, we get into this discussion where, obviously the cartel has upgraded their shit and Nash needs to be upgraded. And Marissa is opposed to it, but also understands. And now there's also the question where, while I think Mercer acknowledges that this might not be moral, there's also a bigger threat out there, and sometimes morality takes a secondary to threats that are out there. And well, now it's on between the two forces.
Yeah,
And
it's also, the point's also made that, there's no going back either, to some degree. You can't undo. You'd hurt the shark more if you tried to put him back in shark form. So it's kind of where you have to live with what's happened to some degree, and understand that that sometimes even bad things have to be made the best of.
and then also we get into the AI side where this doctor who's now an AI has sort of called the military, or said he called the military, in a secret embezzled military base. And I know I'm ruining some of this stuff, but that's also an issue because there's no going back for this AI doctor at this point once the military takes over, because they can pull the plug in a lot of ways.
Yeah, like I said, one of the underlying themes is that of the story is about human interaction with artificial intelligence, and the original scientist that he was created from was a very bad man, arrogant and evil. And we start to see the differences between this hybrid, the scientist who's part human, part AI, and what it means to and how it's changed his personality in this issue too. So I thought that was interesting to explore from a sci-fi point of view. And it's I still try to keep the over-the-top humor when you see his brain in a jar, because I really wanted to have a brain in a jar.
Yeah, and it's also the idea that, just throwing that in there, and then also the acknowledgement, and even just what's going on with all of that stuff. And it's really interesting, the idea that, now they're healing him, and then now it's on. And so what is that like and where's all this lead? Because obviously this is a showdown, and this shark wants revenge on the other doctor.
Right. I believe in telling a complete story. So the next issue will wrap up the current Shark of War story. One way or the other, I have some ideas for spinoffs. Maybe the story will continue. We'll see how it turns out. But this is the second to last issue of this current storyline, and there will be a conclusive finale for this storyline. So it's not going to be one of those things where you're left hanging, never knowing what the conclusion is. There may be openings for more storytelling. I expect. I've got a couple ideas for spinoffs, and maybe there'll be a follow-up series about it. But this is going to be a complete epic.
And that's something that I think is very important, because one of the things that I get, and I think a lot of comic stores don't do this, it's very similar to wrestling. And so a good wrestling feud and a good wrestling match follows the premise of Shakespeare. Shakespeare has always had Act 1 does one thing, Act 2 is the complete opposite, and Act 3, it's anybody's game. And that's how a good wrestling match should be, where if you have 20 minutes, the first 6 minutes should be one side, the next 6 minutes should be the other, and then the last, 8 minutes, it's anybody's game, and it's on like Donkey Kong. I think, a good comic series, if you have 5 issues, the first issue should be one-sided, the second issue should be the other side, or it should lead up. Then you need to have another side where the enemy pushes back, and then, or maybe you have 2 issues that push for the hero, 2 issues that push for the enemy, and then the last issue, it can go any which way. And I think that's what you're doing in a lot of ways, and I think it makes sense, because we obviously, get that pushback, or there's a turning point where we get to now it's 50-50, and now who's going to pull out the win, or who's going to pull out the victory. And look, not every story needs to have, the hero, surviving. The villains can win sometimes. Or, you could have a plethoric victory. Or you could have a victory where the character goes MIA. Or that, you win the battle, and then, people make their retreats. So
I think this is going to come up with a conclusion that will make everybody happy. but leaving open some possibility for additional stories. But it will have you will have things in a place that makes sense. Like I said, whether everybody's happy with it, I can't yet say, but it will definitely be. People can say that they got a complete story out of this, and hopefully they feel it's an epic story.
And I'm curious because obviously storytelling, I feel, is semi-lost right now.
Right.
Where I feel like a bunch of people in comics don't understand how to tell a story. They don't know how to tell the story in the micro. Where I'll pick up an indie comic and there's a formula. Storytelling, I feel, hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
Where the basic premise of it, because when you're telling me a comic story, each issue has to be almost a micro story, part of a larger thing. And I'm curious because obviously I've read the first 4 issues, and this is very much, each issue is its own story, but then it obviously is part of a larger story, and we get what I was sort of describing. And how do you feel about, that being utilized in comics? Because I feel that it's not being delivered the way it should be.
I don't read a lot of mainstream comic books anymore. I kind of occasionally catch up, so I know what's going on. But
even in TV, I feel like it's not there, and I feel like it's a lost art.
Yeah, I think a lot of this with Netflix and Amazon and things, the streaming services have kind of programmed in for like these 13 episode seasons. So they're gonna fill out, and but the idea is that they should not be a self-contained story. It should be continuing arc. So you wind up having a story that could probably be well told in 4 episodes, has to be stretched out to a 10 episode season. So I think a lot of that is a problem with what we see in modern story. There used to be in comic books this right for the trades, where every 6 issues everything would happen in 6 issues. A 6-issue arc, and now it's gotten even more decompressed, where things have to happen over multiple episodes or issues. And like I said, I really try so that when you read one of my comic books, you get some satisfaction from that specific story, even though each of these issues has ended on a cliffhanger, and then that primes you for the next issue.
It's also with indie versus anything else. Like, I'm moving away from large series to mini series and mainstream for 2 reasons. A, it's a lot shorter time commitment, and it's also less expensive, because if I preview an order and it's $250 a book, it's $10 for 4 issues, and I'm not massively committed. Or a 6-issue thing, we're talking $15. We're not talking a lot of money versus buying 25, 30, 50 issues of Batman. Not saying I'm not going to enjoy it. Or, Teen Titans Academy. There's a lot of issues in that. And after a while, it gets very expensive when every book is $3. And you have 30 books. It's a $90 series. Over the course of, 4 or 5 years, it gets old quickly and it gets expensive, and it's also a big time commitment. And so obviously that's another thing that I think is a problem, at least that for me, is that I want 5 issues, 6 issues, 4 issues, 3 issues, because I want to be in and out. And then on indie also, there is a 3 to 4 to 6 month gap between issues.
Yeah,
and that's the other thing too.
Yeah, I think that indie side of time is probably always going to be a factor for people like us. I do everything almost all myself. So, I keep hoping maybe I can crank out a book in 3 or 4 months, but then it winds up taking me 6 months. And I just think in some ways that's just unavoidable. So I try to deliver a lot of extra value. I mentioned some of the extra features like the Science of Shark of War and things like that in my digital editions. So, my books are longer than the average, a mainstream comic. They're usually 28 interior pages. I have, extra features, like I said, in the digital version. And then I try to, to make the value better, because, on price, I offer a lot of, special bonuses, especially if you're a shark fan, like, my shark tooth necklace for anybody who pledges over a $30 level gets this for free. This is it's a fossil from 40 million years ago, and it's already set for a necklace. So a great Christmas gift, for example. So that's kind of a way I can give more value that for my fans than they might be able to get from, so I can compete with the mainstream guys who may be able to give you a comic book cheaper and more often, but aren't going to be able to give you these extra value points. So I'm always trying to increase my value proposition.
There's a saying where you either have to be the cheapest, the most expensive, or the most valuable.
Yeah.
And you have to be one of the three. And you have to, to do that to be competitive. And I think it's very important. I also just think from a time standpoint, it's the idea that, if you only have 5 issues and you can produce one every 6 months, it's going to take you 2.5 years, I want to say, to do something. First thing, if you have a 30-issue book and you're only producing, 2 a year, it's going to take you 15 years to get it out. And it's complicated. And also, 5 issues really is perfect because you have a middle point, which is issue 3, and then it starts sort of going down where, okay, we're getting into the nitty-gritty where all hell breaks loose. And it really is a nice pacing, I feel, in this. So obviously that's something that I am more catering to, where I'm not interested in picking up 10 issues of a book. I'm not on Kickstarter because it's going to take forever for it to get pushed out. And so I think there's a real change in how things are done in that regard. And so I think there's a big change in the guard as well. And obviously you mentioned something else, and I think it's important to talk about it, where the art is very different on your book than other people's. And you do it yourself, and it's all 3D done. And to show what I mean by this, it looks like this, and this, and this. And so obviously you're using a lot of 3D rendering models. You're utilizing a lot of 3D, digital art, obviously other, flatter digital art. And so what is that like? Because, and I say this very, very respectfully, but you're not the traditional artist per se.
No, so, I think, I'm never going to try and sell my books by saying that, I'm a Todd McFarlane or a Jack Kirby or something like that. The story and the idea and concepts are going to be what sells it, and the art is going to be good enough to clearly and in an exciting, dynamic fashion illustrate what's going on. Everything that my stories are clear to follow. The artwork serves the story well, I think, but it's not going to be to the taste of a lot of people. That's.
What is that like though? Because obviously this is a very different position, because I don't know who else is doing anything like this. I'm sure other people are, but most people in comics right now, they go and pick up another artist. They go, and if they're the writer, they're going out and saying, hey, let me go pick up, this person, whether I get them internationally, let me pay them a page rate, and you're doing it yourself. And you're also utilizing a very, very different style. And it's different. And I think people are looking for different, and they're not necessarily looking for something to be perfect, where this is just because how many people do this style and it's something that's out there. And I think people are saying, look, I want something different in my collection that's not the traditional thing, because after a while you get sick of Batman being drawn. And if you read a lot of DC, even if Jim Lee's drawing Batman or Greg Capullo's drawing Batman, or I can't think of another famous Batman artist, it starts to become all the same. Where there's only so many variations of a particular style. Even on Kickstarter, if you go international, you could look at 20 Kickstarters, and after a while, they're going to start blending together really well, and this sort of doesn't blend together so easily.
Yeah, I think it, like I said, I did it because, when I started this, I didn't know any artists, I didn't have any contacts. I'm getting some now, but so I decided, and I learned some, as an engineer, I'm pretty good with computers, and I learned some of this digital modeling, and I said, well, why don't I use that to try and make my comic book? So that's how I started. And, my plan going forward is I'm going to do issue 5 myself. But if I do a spin-off series, I'm probably going to get another artist. I'm hoping, my Kickstarters right now are at the point where, they pay for the printing. They aren't really big enough for the artist yet, but I'm hoping that, as I build, that my Kickstarter will be enough that I can start hiring artists to do the spin-off series. I'm working with an artist on an anthology submission for a little spin-off of the Shark of War storyline right now, in fact. So, I'm certainly not opposed to using other artists, and I like that idea. But for this first round, I decided I'd do the art myself, and I'm going to finish it, with my art for now. And I hope people like it, because, it is different, but it's also not going to be to everybody's taste. But I think if you're open to the story, you'll find that the art serves the story quite well. And it also gives you my vision, captured exactly as I want it, or as close as I can humanly get it to what I want of the story, how the story should be told. And I hope that, that provides, people with what they would find interesting.
And even to talk about that, because you brought something up that's super interesting, and I think a lot of people in Kickstarter, and people who are not into Kickstarter and say are just consumers, sometimes don't even think about it, is that it takes a lot to produce a comic. Producing comics is not cheap, because a lot of people get page rates. The big two. Obviously you get a page rate if you're the writer, you get a page rate if you're the artist. Colorists get page rates. Editors sometimes get paid. They might not get paid a page rate, but they're getting a salary, or they're getting a book fee. And obviously, when you're doing an indie book, if you hire an artist, they're going to get a page rate. If an artist hires a writer, they're going to get a page rate, or they're going to get equity in the book, or some exchange, or a flat fee, or whatnot. And then also there's printing costs. And unfortunately, sometimes people have to have really high goals on Kickstarter so that they can, they borrow money, or they take money from their job, and they don't necessarily appropriate their finances, and they're not contributing to, making that extra, mortgage payment, or, as they take their bonus from their job they got, and instead of putting it down in a down payment on a house, or putting it into a fund for that, they're funding a Kickstarter, and they pay themselves back. So later on, and that's what the Kickstarter is for. And so I just think that, obviously that's why a lot of people sometimes do the art themselves, or they do the coloring themselves, or they do the lettering themselves, because every dollar matters. And so obviously, and you said that your Kickstarters are paying for the printing, they're paying for a bunch of the rewards, some of the shipping, and obviously, you're doing it all yourself, which also significantly helps, and you're growing slowly. So obviously, that's something that I just think is very important to acknowledge and talk about, is that making sure you manage your finances so that you don't put yourself in a hole, because it happens. I mean, I've seen people's Kickstarters and their goals and their stretch goals. They haven't made any money on a book, and they lost money on a book, and they got burned hard on it. And then also, I'm sure you've seen it, I've seen it, where people haven't delivered on their stretch goals or even the project for years because they ran out of funding, because they didn't anticipate how expensive this stuff was going to be. And so,
I obviously, if I wanted to, I'm not really breaking even now. I'm not making money. I'm doing this because I want to do it. Fortunately, I have a good enough job where I'm not any having any financial issues from doing it. But I'm not making money at my current Kickstarter, and even with con sales and things like that. I'm probably I'm in the red probably. And if I was hire an artist, I would have to raise my Kickstarter goal from $1,000, which is what I do now, to probably $3 to even, and then that still probably wouldn't really cover it. If you figure a decent art team is going to be $100 a page, you're $3,000 right there.
And then also it creates a whole stressful situation, because the idea is that it affects the Kickstarter algorithm, because once you're funded, that captures more people interested, and it creates a whole, push forward effect.
Right.
If you see a Kickstarter, so I have a friend's Kickstarter, he's 847% funded. Now his goal was $100. let's not get ahead of ourselves. And it's a great project, but you see that and you're like, oh snap, that's 847% funded. That makes a comment. Now you could say, oh, you know what it is, that's impressive or it's not impressive. It's very impressive. And so understanding that if all of a sudden you raise $2,500, you'd be 250% funded.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of a knock, and it's very important because it affects the way you can advertise it, and then Kickstarter starts paying attention to it, saying, wait a second, this project did very well. We need to give it a badge. But if you're only 3,000 and then you only raise 3,100, you're only 102% funded. That's not very impressive.
Yeah, I'm not sure how the Kickstarter algorithm works on that. I don't
know how it works either.
I know that the project we love tag is sometimes given arbitrarily, and I can't always understand it. And sometimes it's given to projects. Hey, are we there?
Yeah, I'm here now.
I think we broke off. Yeah, I think the projects that make a lot of money always get it, unless they're girly comics, and those make a lot of money, but they don't get the project we love badge.
I'm super curious about this. How many projects have you backed on Kickstarter?
I think I backed about 104. 100.
Are you a super
backer? Yes, last I looked, I was a super backer.
So when did you get your super backer badge?
It's been some months now. I think if you back like so many projects at over $10, you get, they don't want you just backing projects at $1 and give you the super backer. I think you got to back at a higher level.
I've backed projects at like $5. I backed like 5 projects at $5, and I've only backed 30 projects. Now I'm a super backer.
Oh, really?
So
I always thought you had to do it was a $10. It was like 25 projects at $10 above, and that got
no. I've backed a bunch of projects. I've backed probably about 20 projects in about 6 months in a very short amount of time. But I just became a super backer on a $10 pledge on my last one. Now, my point that I'm trying to make about this is that Kickstarter's algorithm is weird as fuck. But what I do know is that this is why this conversation is so important. It's because the idea is that if all of a sudden for those who don't know, I'm running a Kickstarter in November. If I set that goal for $500 and then I raise 400%, that's impressive. If I set that goal for $1,000 and it's only 200%, it's not as impressive, and it's going to affect my Kickstarter algorithm. At 200%,
I'm not sure I believe that. Because I know some people who set their goal at $1, which you can do. Which means they have 20,000% funding or something like that. And I don't know that actually helped them. The sweet spot I've been told is to set for something you can reach, but something you can exceed. You don't want to be too low. Because also remember, once you hit goal, a lot of people who might back you will say, he's hit goal, I'm not going to bother. Whereas if you're pushing to hit goal, there'll be some people who, if you're 90% of goal on your last day, there'll be some people who back you simply because they want to help you get over the line. They see your project's close. They might not even be that interested in it, but they'll say, oh, gee, look, that project's almost there. I'll make a difference, and I'll give some money to it.
That's interesting, because I have the opposite view, where I'm more likely to back a project that's funded, because I view it where when I'm backing projects, I know certain things get funded immediately. So I know certain people have a track record of doing $20,000, and even if they're not funded yet, I know they're going to reach it.
Yeah.
But I know for a fact that I want the project to be funded. And so if I know it's going to be funded or it's already funded, I'm more likely to jump in because I know I'm going to get the product. That's what I care about. Is that when I'm backing on Kickstarter, is that all I want the product. I don't really care if you fund it yourself, if you go through DC, Marvel, Image, or an indie comic publisher. I just want the product, and I just want to buy it, and I want it at a fair price. That's what I want. I want it at the best price it can be produced at, without as many middlemen handling it as possible. and at the fastest speed, which I think makes sense because I'm a consumer as much as I am a collector, as much as I am an interviewer. That's what I want. I want the problem solved, and I want the practical element of it solved. And that's how I view Kickstarter, is that it's a practical component for me. But that's just how I view it. But that's so interesting because I view it very differently. But I can see the other side where if it's 95% funded, somebody's going to push you over the edge.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are on, there's a lot of variety of reasons people are on Kickstarter. And I think some people are on there because they want to support, artistic artists, or they want to support comic books or things like that. So I think, if you look at a Kickstarter's trend line, and I saw this because on my first Kickstarter, because I didn't fund until the last day. And, at the last day, I was at like 85% or something like that. And I funded, the last shoot took place in the last day to get me over the top. So I think there's definitely people who want to do it to support art. If you go to the Kickstarter page, the search page under comic books, and you can sort, one of the things you can do is sort by ending soonest, and you can actually see the projects that are ending soonest. And I did this early on, is you can watch as they expire and move up the page and expire. The projects that are like 90% there, they're almost all going to make 100. They're going to make it over. The projects that are like 20% there, they're not going to get any more. So I think there's definitely people who are looking at that and saying, I'm going to fund that, because it seems like once you're close, you make it over.
I think usually in your first week, if you're over 50% or 60%, the likelihood of you funding is so much higher. Or even if you're in like the 45% range in your first week, the likelihood of you funding is significantly higher than if you're at 30%. And I'm sure there's data on it, but just from what I've seen anecdotally, I think it's very important that you get into that, because I think the sweet spot is once you hit 45% and you have 21 days left, it's very easy to fund because the majority of the work's been done already for you and people see it, and it's sort of a sweet spot, especially if your goal's reasonable. Mm-hmm. If your goal's 100,000 and you're at 45% and you have 21 days, it's a little bit more of a fight. But if your goal is 1,500 and you are at $700, it's more reasonable that you have a good chance of funding, from what I understand. Right. But it's super interesting, and now I'm paying attention because I'm launching one, and so it's getting exciting. You knew a while ago what I was going to be doing.
Yeah. You mentioned it, yeah.
And so it's going to be really cool. I'm not going to tell anybody any ideas what's coming publicly, but you're all going to hate me. You're all going to hate me, and you're not going to hate me because you're angry with me. You're going to hate me because you didn't think of it first.
Oh, okay.
I'm doing.
I'll keep an eye on your campaign then.
I'm
always willing to steal ideas.
One of the pledges you're all going to hate me for, because you're going to be like, damn, I wish I thought of it first. Wow. One of them, I'm just saying that's where it's going. So on that note, though, we're not talking about me. We're talking about you. And I do want to talk about the reward. So there's the digital catch-up. So there's just the digital issue 4 if you have digital issues 1 through 3. There's also the digital catch-up, and that stuff is pretty cheap, no shipping, and it's delivered straight to your inbox whenever the book comes out, and it's super awesome in that regard. It's also the deluxe stuff, so you get all the bonus stuff. And there's also the physical copy. I think this is the first cover.
Yeah, this is the base cover.
And obviously it's not a base, it's more of piranhas attacking a shark, but this is cover A, or the base cover.
That's kind of, it's your basic cover, yeah.
I was just throwing a joke in there. It's all right.
Okay, yeah. Because
there is a base in this thing, but obviously this is never. Right. I'm sorry, you gave it to me. You gave it to me. But then going further into this, obviously this is Jaws.
Yeah, I always do a Jaws poster cover, and if you look at the covers, they kind of follow the evolution of the story. The first cover is very close to the original Jaws poster, where he's the hunter. The second cover is where he's become the hunted by the piranha Third cover is where he's the defeated, and the female is actually mocking him instead of being threatened by him. And now here's the resurgence of issue 4, where he's back and on the attack. So I always do one based on the poster, and I always try to spin it up different each time.
And so to even talk about that, because obviously whenever you do a shark book, whether it's the Meg or there's a bunch of other shark movies out there and a bunch of things dealing with sharks, it is important to pay tribute to the shark movie, which is Jaws.
Right.
Because it gets a bunch of people involved, that obviously people are attracted to it. And so obviously, where did that idea even come from? Because it makes 100% sense, and it's just a no-brainer.
Yeah, I always wanted to have, a few Easter eggs to Jaws in issue 1. I think there's actually somebody saying we're going to get a bigger boat, intentionally referencing the show. But yeah, there's a lot of Jaws fans on Facebook and stuff, and I definitely want to appeal to them. So this time I actually went one step further, and I got the Amanda to do that. We're
going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. I actually like Amanda Rachel. She's been very nice to me. Okay, so we'll show that one, and obviously, we don't like Quint. We don't. I'm sorry.
I always like Quint. I think he's kind of an anti-hero. He's had it rough. It's made him hardened, but he's tough, and he does what's necessary kind of guy.
He had to go. I'm sorry. It's like Herschel from The Walking Dead. He had to go.
What I like about this cover is it gives you a view you don't see in the movie. If you watch the movie scene where he dies, you kind of see him falling away from Brody, with Brody trying to reach him, and then you see a side view of the shark eating him alive. And here we're actually getting the view as if we're Brody and we're looking at it happening. So it's kind of a spin on the movie, giving you a different viewpoint while still paying tribute to the movie.
And what's cool about this is that obviously, it's also putting, the shark in a different position, because in this book, the shark's the hero.
Yeah.
And it's attacking, the people from Jaws. Obviously, it's paying tribute, and it's kind of a cool mashup where you don't know who to root for technically in this book. And it puts you in a weird position, and it's kind of cool. And it's also just really well done. It's a really well done cover.
Good job.
And it's also more traditional comic well done as well, which is nice as well, because you get that in there, and it's an Amanda Rachel's cover, and she does fantastic work. If you don't know what she does, look her up, because if you like killer clowns, she's perfect for you. She's perfect for you. She does a lot of that. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be scared, there's some scary shit she's done. So I'm just saying. So obviously on that point, and then even going further into this, because you mentioned that obviously this is also paying tribute to Jaws. And I think it's no secret that comics are a very niche market. And there are fewer people in comics. It's like wrestling. There are few people in comics. Anime is a big market in a lot of ways. But when you niche down into things like Gundam and other things that are much more specific in the anime community, you get really niched down. And this is very much a marketing outside of comics to a bigger audience of Jaw fans that might not necessarily be interested in comics on a typical day-to-day market base, but they might say, oh man, this is a cool comic, and this is a cool thing for me to own if I enjoy Jaws, or this is a cool comic that I could reach out and look at into Jaws. And so what is that? Because this is very much reaching outside of the comic bubble, which is how marketing is supposed to work, for those who don't know.
Yeah, I'm always trying to interact a little bit with the Jaws forum and share some of this stuff on different Jaws message boards, because I'm hopeful that people like Jaws and are fanatical about it will find this cool and interesting to see.
Because you're going to bring in, no matter what you do, certain comic people are just going to flock to this.
Yeah.
No matter what you do, you might need to remind them that this exists, and you might need to do a little marketing to them just to get them back in, because they might have, it might have been 6 months and it just might not be on their radar just because so much media is coming out. but it's the idea where WWE, for those, and it's an aside, but it's very important, I think, for people to understand, WWE does not market to WWE fans.
Right.
WWE does not market to me. They don't need to market to me. Now, they might need to market me a comic book when they've taken a 6-month hiatus from Boom Studios just to remind me it exists. But they don't market to me. They market to my sister, who's not a WWE fan, with Bad Bunny or Cardi B or a celebrity. They don't market to me, and my sister and her husband watched WrestleMania for the first time. They're not wrestling fans. They wanted to watch it partially because Bad Bunny was involved in it. Bad Bunny's red hot. Now, it's just not a huge Bad Bunny fan, but it got her in, and they watched it as a Saturday night treat to some degree a few months ago. And so this is what that does in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of people in comics can learn that you don't need to market to comic fans. You need to remind your audience, you need to market to everybody who's not a comic fan.
Yeah.
Which is what you want to do, unless your product is comic specific, like my Kickstarter that's going to drop. I'm just saying that is only when it makes sense. But I don't want to market my podcast to comic fans, because when I spend real money to push this out, I want to market it to people who are not comic fans. I want to market this podcast to shark fans.
Right.
Which makes more sense because I already have everybody in the comic market checking it out by posting it in every group. So I think that's what that cover does really well.
I wish I had everybody in the comic market checking it out, because it's really hard to drive even all the comic fans to the Kickstarter page. The people who are already my readers will go, and some additional number of people, but the broader Kickstarter comic book audience, like the people who paid $1 million to get the Keanu Reeves Berserker comic book, most of those are never going to go check it out. Even
let me ask you a question about that. Do you think that most comic fans? Do you think that 1.7,000 or so, or 1.2 million was comic fans, or do you think it was non-comic fans? Because I don't think it was comic fans.
I'm not really sure. I think it was a combination. I think a lot of comic fans, I think a lot of movie fans did come in, but I expect most of the people who look at comic books on Kickstarter at least checked out that Berserker, even if they didn't back it.
My thoughts on it. And Tom Hutchinson gave me some data, and I don't know how true it is, but I think it makes some sense, is that in 2020, we had 4 or 5 big Kickstarters dropping. We had Todd McFarlane, we had Scott Snyder, we had Keanu Reeves, and I forget the other, we had Power Rangers, and then I forget the fifth one. And those brought in a lot of money. And it brought a lot of attention into Kickstarter, and everybody did better in 2020 when all those books were happening because more people were on. And I actually got made fun of when I was on a bunch of shows talking about this, where I said, wait a second, you guys realize what's going to happen next. And people was like, oh, no, this isn't going to happen. And I'll explain. I said, when they leave, there's going to be a vacuum and everybody's going to suffer because more air is brought in and they're going to take air out when they leave. And that's exactly what's happened on Kickstarter in 2021. Before cons were reopening, now less projects are actually funding on Kickstarter because there's less air and there's less attention. So when you remove Keanu Reeves, Scott Snyder, Todd McFarlane, and Boom Studios doing Power Rangers for their second big Kickstarter, there's less people on there looking at everybody else's project, and the tide is lower. And people said, you're wrong. They said, oh, no, that's not a bad thing. I said, no, it's a horrific thing because they created a massive artificial inflation that then when they left, it didn't go back to normal. It went below normal.
I haven't seen that to know one way or the other. My feeling is that they brought in some people to Kickstarter who are now on the emailing list, and they'll potentially get emails to back something else. Whether that actually happens or not, I don't know. I
think that a lot of those people are on Kickstarter looking at the updates every day, looking at the updates, and then they source something else and they source something else. And so that's just what I think and how I view it. Now, do I think, I'm not saying they didn't have a right to be there. I think that's great, and I love the fact that they were there. And I think that but I don't think it was an overall good. I don't. I actually think that it was the exact opposite. And I think that, it created a short-term good. It did not create a long-term good. And it's the same thing. And the only reason why I know this is because this exact same thing happened 2 years earlier with Ronda Rousey in WWE. And I got made fun of that too. And their women's division in WWE suffered for about 18 months after the fact, and then had to renormalize. And people call me crazy, but they didn't stop the trend. And I was like, and it's now that problem is being solved in wrestling, and it's going to take, I think, another year for that problem to be solved in Kickstarter. And again, I'm not a Kickstarter expert, and this is just how I view it, but it's super interesting what happened with that. But that's a total aside. That's a total aside. It's just such an interesting point because I don't think with Keanu Reeves, most of the people backing were comic fans. I think it's exactly what every Kickstarter needs to do, is follow that model. I think that's the only long-term good, is Boom Studios explained what you need to do as marketing. But that's just my opinion. And that's what I'm going to be doing when I do my Kickstarter, because I'm not interested as far as and for those who don't know, we're funding season 3 for the podcast is the Kickstarter. It's the idea that I'm not interested. I mean, technically, some of the people are my clients are definitely in the comic realm, and some of the rewards are comic book related. But it's the idea that I want to get other people who are not in that, because that's sort of how you market effectively. But anyway, there's one more cover we got to talk about, and it's this one.
Yep, this is Brian Dawson's issue 4 cover. He did an issue 3 cover as well, which is also really cool. It's hanging over my my shoulder here. Back there actually. He did for issue 3. Yeah, this is Marissa riding the shark with her spear in hand. Basically, we talked about what would be a cool cover. She's an important part of the book, and I wanted to have her on a cover, a different cover, and I really wanted to have the shark, flying at us in an aggressive fashion that looks cool. I think Brian does a really good job with drawing the shark, giving you a dynamic look at it. So,
and what I like about this one is that the shark's coming at you, and it's also the fact that Marissa is attractive as a character. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah,
but this isn't cheesecake.
Right. I wanted to have her, I've always, in the comic book, I've basically tried very hard to show her to be athletic and attractive, but I haven't tried to push it too far. So this falls into that, and I think it works well.
I think it works well also, and I think that it's important to know lines, because I don't view this as a cheesecake oriented.
Right. It's not meant to be. I did it. Greg Bo Watson did a cover for me for issue 3. It's much more cheesecakey than this one is. But yeah, this one is very much I think just a good clean cover of her riding the shark in appropriate attire for the Caribbean.
And I also think that it's a little bit cheesecake, where you have a girl in a bikini, you have a sexy girl.
It's an appropriate attire for the Caribbean. I mean, it's not taking it too far.
And I like that cover, and I think it just gives variety, where if you're not necessarily a huge Jaws fan and you want something else, I think it's in a great cover. And obviously, one of the cool things that's out there is that you also have a 4-pack for all 4 covers. So obviously you're saving money there. You get all of the Amanda Rachel covers up to this point. I think you get all of the Brian covers. I think there's a complete catch-up of Shark of War. I don't know if certain covers are missing from that.
I think there's one where you get all 14 covers that I've done. I did 3 for issues 1, 2, 4 for issues 3 and 4. So yeah, I think there's a couple of tiers at the higher end where you can get all 14 covers, all 4 issues with all the covers. So So yeah, there's definitely a lot of options, and I try to keep my price per cover down to what I can reasonably do, and I discount if you buy them as add-on, I have add-on options. So if you buy them as add-ons, it would be more, and I always try to make sure that people buying the tiers are getting a discounted price
It's
from
that
if you
too.
just added it up completely.
It's that too, where if you're buying, and obviously there's also a combo pack where you could get the Brian Dawson and the Amanda Rachels, and you're saving some money. I think you're saving, I think like $12 on that, or somewhere around there in that price range. And so obviously that's very helpful because you're saving money on shipping and you're saving money on, a little bit of money on if you were to buy them individually. And so it's very helpful, I think. And I think that, obviously I know some Kickstarters, the bundle pack and buying it individually is the same price. And I think that's crazy because if I'm giving you more money, I want a discount.
Yeah, I try to always knock off things a few bucks if you're buying more and more. So and increase that as you get up. So I put a little math into my pricing structure, try and make sure it makes sense for you to buy a higher tier than to try and buy things individually. And that if you want that, like I said, there is a bunch of add-ons too that you can buy as well. Not only the more shark teeth, if you want more, if you have more kids that want shark tooth necklaces, but some little stuffed sharks and
Hey, hey,
keychain
hey, hey,
sharks.
I guarantee nobody's buying it for their kids. They're buying it for themselves.
Oh, the comic, yeah, but I
No, no, no,
the
the teeth, the teeth. They're going to give their kid the comic. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. We're all big children out there. I like how you assume that these people are buying the teeth for their kids. I'm telling you.
Well, I definitely have something that goes to the kids, because I added these to my zombie sharks and my other little plush sharks. I added these intentionally to have something at the Comic-Con to sell to younger kids, and they do pretty well at the cons for the younger kids. Some people, adults, will buy them. Usually younger women, young women, but not children. But mostly it's kids who wind up getting them, who aren't going to get a comic book or interested in comic books, or maybe even old enough to read a comic book. Especially my comic books, which are geared more to a little older people, but they pick that up. So I'm offering those in my as part of my add-ons, and when I go to cons, I bring them with me too. So I always have some extra stuff to sell.
That's something that I think is also important to bring up is that I'm sure you've seen the question on Facebook where I'm going to a con for the first time, and I've seen that question pop up a bunch as of lately. And I think one of the things that I've been recommending, and I'm curious what you have to recommend, is that obviously bring a lot of 10s and 20s because breaking large bills is helpful for yourself. People carry money and they need money for other things. Exact change matters. And also the people around you, the two tables around you, if you can break somebody's 50, you might not be making money, but you never know when it's helpful. And I'm curious, obviously you bring those plushies, I think is something that's very helpful because not everybody wants to buy a comic, but what is, maybe, you're passing by and dad buys this comic and he's got his 5-year-old around and he wants to get his 5-year-old something and nothing's really popping off at the con, and that solves a problem. And so I think just having things that make sense and other items that are not comic related but relate to your comic is so important. And so I'm curious like what advice you have on that, because that's been asked a lot lately.
Yeah, my plushes are probably one of the most affordable things you can get your kid at a con, because I don't really sell them. I sell them so I make some money off of them, but I buy them in bulk and I sell them at a reasonable rate. So if you look at what you can get at a con for $5 or $6 or something like that, my plushes work out pretty well for most people. So I always have them. Yeah, I bring I make sure I bring a bunch of cash with me. I take credit cards too, but I'd say 80% of my sales are cash. I try to keep the sales to even numbers. the prices to even numbers, including tax and stuff. So I only, if people use a credit card, I throw in the, I have the fee on that, but I don't, if it's just cash, I just take cash at an even amount. So I don't have to break, quarters and stuff. So I don't bring a lot of change like quarters and dimes and stuff with me, because I usually don't need it.
Usually 10s, 20s, maybe a 50 if need be. Usually, I only bring
Fives a lot.
fives are helpful. I only bring 20s to cons, in which that when I'm buying, I bring $1,000 in 20s.
Wow.
And the reason why is that I deal with everything in cash, and 20 is a great number because most items are $20 or $40 or like $25, and a 20 is not that hard to break.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I feel. And then the last reward that you offer is you have some pencils that are up. And I don't know if they're still up, but I think you have pencils of Brian Dawson and Greg-Bo Watson.
Yeah, for issue 3, both of them did pencil work for me. The issue 4 covers are all digital. So actually, you can kind of see it behind me here. Let me see if I can move. That's right behind me here is the I just screwed up everything, I guess. Right behind me here is the digital for the Brian Dawson cover, for example, the pencils for it. So if you want that at the highest level, basically you get all my books, all my stuff, including like keychains and things like that, shark teeth, and you get his pencils if you want some original art.
And so there's a lot of stuff. There's something for everybody in this
Right.
Kickstarter and all that stuff. And obviously, everything, because you go extremely cheap if you just want to read the book. If you just want a physical book, it's not that expensive. And you can go all the way up to those higher tiers to get everything you want. And you can catch up with everything that's going on if you read it. Also, what you do that's cool is that you can read the first issue for free.
Mm-hmm. Bitingcomics.com. You can get the first issue, digital downloads. You'll even get to download the template of my paper shark toy if you want to make your own paper shark. One of the early backer bonuses I have is I'm actually giving out. I'm going to give out cardstock prints of that paper shark toy for people who want to put together their own paper shark. Is part of their package for physical backers, but you'll get that for free as well as the comic book. And
so there's a lot of stuff out there, and then obviously there's something for everybody in this book. If you're age appropriate, I will add that.
It's interesting. I show when I'm at the cons, for example, I actually open up my book to the most violent pages, where there's actually a person bit in half, for example, and most people aren't worried about it for their kids. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but then I'm like, here's the most violent thing, and the guy's like, yeah, it's fine for my kid.
so to even talk about that, because I grew up and I was watching things that I wasn't supposed to watch as an anime fan, something like Outlaw Star, which definitely had sexual innuendos, and I'm 7, 8 years old, right?
Yeah.
Probably should have watched it. That was 20 years ago on Toonami. My parents didn't know any better, and it was awesome. I was watching things like Gundam, which is extremely violent in a lot of ways. You have Gundam. Legitimately, gun is in the name.
Right.
And that's why I love Gundam. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that I have been exposed to a very young age of a lot of action and violent cartoons and anime, but I was never exposed to, I guess, what is known as crimes of brutality. And I think parents are more concerned right now of exposing their kids to crimes of brutality versus explosions. Because I think a kid understands that if a missile goes and hits another, tank and it's an enemy, that it's not as bad as something that is more of a psychological crime of brutality. And if I have kids, that's what I'm worried about, is the brutality. I'm not worried about Gundam Wing or a shark biting another person, or a shark with gigantic bazookas on its side shooting at another piranhas coming at it, because I think my kid is going to be smart enough to know that's not legit, if that makes sense, versus a crime of rape, for instance.
Right.
And I think that's what parents are becoming concerned about. Now, I'm not a parent yet, but if I become one in the next 2-3 years, that's what I'm going to be concerned about for my kids, which I think makes sense. And that's why I think people are like, when they open and see a violent page and they see a shark biting somebody in half, they're like, oh, that's nothing. Versus the idea. And so I think that there's been a very shift where I think possibly 30 years ago that would have been viewed very differently.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah.
So, but I digress. Obviously, I am curious where cons are going in your mind. I know we spoke about it the last time also. It's a hard shift. I just took a real hard left off of that topic. Real hard. That's what we do. It's like changing the gears. We're going from like fourth to second, and you're skipping third. But obviously, I know you're doing a bunch of cons, and I think you're doing a con this weekend.
Right.
And I know you've done a bunch of them, and obviously, New York Comic Con is sort of the biggest con coming up, and I think it's going to be a real, experiment of where we're going as far as how cons are going to be conducted in the future, if they're going to be profitable on a big, massive level, how people are going to be happy with it or they're going to be unhappy with it. And I know that you've done pretty decently, I think, at cons considering the environment. So, where do you feel that we're heading with all this con stuff and what's going on with it?
Yeah, I think that I've done 5 or 6 now since February when they started up again in the South. They were fairly well attended. I think people had a lot of fun. Obviously, there's this resurgence concern that people are worried about. But I think in the long term, people want to do these. I think they want to go. So my thought is that they're gonna continue in a fashion. I don't know if the mega cons like New York. I haven't tried to look into that because the table fees are so high. I'm not sure I could make clear my money. Not to mention the price of going to New York. So for now, I'm sticking to the cons that have low cost table fees. So.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of big cons. I personally, the biggest con I went to, 2 of them, Anime Boston, which is an anime con, which is a different beast because anime cons are not so much about autographs and expenditures. I find anime cons is less about money, it's more about interactions. And I find Comic Cons, you need a bunch of money to have a good time at the big one. If you don't have $500 at New York Comic Con, your enjoyment is extremely limited. I hate to say it because it's very much a money-driven entity. I stated that I come into a con with $1,000 and I'm a consumer and I have a great time, but that $1,000 doesn't go that far. It doesn't. Buying stuff, autographs, CGCs, it doesn't go as far as people think it does. But I think that at the smaller cons, $200 goes a long way, and also I get to interact with creators more and I get to talk to people. And especially if, there's only 3 people signing, you could have a 25-minute conversation with a creator about your favorite book. And also I would imagine if you're an indie creator, you can sell me your book and there's less pressure.
Yeah, I think that, from my point of view, like I said, I think the table fees are a big issue. I want to have a steady stream of traffic going by my table, and I don't have to pay too much to get it. I'd like to someday do a big con just to be seen by a larger crowd, more audience building than the fact that I think I'm going to make money on it. I'd be fine breaking even, but some of the bigger cons, even if you can get an artist alley table, they want $500 on up just for that, and that's a lot of sales for me to have to do to clear that.
Yeah, and I think that's something that people have to reconsider. I think it's also what can you do with that $500 also is where I would imagine you're at too. Is that can that $500 go to 3 smaller cons, for instance, and can I generate $900 on that position, or can I generate, or can I stay closer to home? That's another thing too, is that if you're going to New York, you got to stay in a hotel, you're away from home, you're away from work, you're away from a lot of stuff. So obviously it matters. Not to mention, we're in the age of the internet. Facebook ads can be very effective. $500 in Facebook ads can go a long way if you know what you're doing. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Just saying. But I digress right there. And I know you're doing a bunch of stuff. And I know that I think you got like 4 or 5 more coming up this year.
Yeah, I've got at least 3 or probably 5. Yeah, that I plan to do before Thanksgiving, and that'll probably be it. Mostly in the South Carolina, Georgia area. I'm hoping to do a Florida one sometime later in the year, either late this year or early next year. But right now, it's just gonna be South Carolina and Georgia.
And so obviously there's a lot of stuff going on. And so on that note, where can people find you? Because obviously, where can people find you on Twitter, Facebook, and also know where you're attending? Because obviously a lot of people speak all over, and a lot of people listen from all over. I got a bunch of people down in Florida, a bunch of people, a few people in Georgia, a few people in South Carolina. So where can people, know where you're going to be at, con-wise, stay up to date with you, obviously back to Kickstarter, even pick up other things, sign up for your email list, because that's super important at this point. And obviously you can try before you buy. I love Shark of War. It's going to be in my digital package, you guys. You don't get to submit to my digital tier on my Kickstarter, guys. You have to be asked and invited in. It is an invitation only tier for people who I actually like their comic. So that's how much I love your comic, man.
Oh,
so where can people find you and all that stuff? Because I want people to actually go out and back this Kickstarter and buy it.
Okay, the Kickstarter, and I think this is on screen here, is sow.bitingcomics.com. That'll take you right to the Kickstarter page directly. So sow.bitingcomics.com. If you just go to bitingcomics.com, you'll go to where you can sign up for my email, and you'll immediately get the first issue of Shark of War free. You'll also get the download of the Shark of War paper toy and some of the other bonus features I always give away to everybody who signs up for my mailing list. On Twitter, I'm B Lacy 1. On Instagram, I'm Ben Lacy 1, and on Facebook, which is probably my biggest factor, is Shark of War /Shark of War on Facebook.
And obviously, I've been saying this, I'm going to keep saying it, is that you have to support indie comics. What that means is, back Kickstarters. Obviously, sign up for email lists. Share Kickstarters, actually follow people on Facebook, like the Facebook page, the Shark of War Facebook page, share it. If you know somebody who's into sharks, obviously let them know about it, because all that stuff goes a long way. It's happened before on this show where people have shared out an interview, people have shared Kickstarters, and then somebody's gotten 4 or 5 backers. And you might say, oh, they only got, $5. Well, if you get 4 or 5 backers, that's $25. And it gets you closer to your goal. And, every little dollar helps, and it makes a difference. Because if you have 300 backers and your goal is $1,500 and everybody's, putting $5 in, you're funded very, very quickly. And so obviously it goes a long way. And so obviously, and sharing can be just as effective as backing, because again, Facebook algorithms are not what they used to be. And something on a news feed can go a very, very long way. So that's something to keep in mind. And also, just support, because doing and producing comics, it is a tough game in a lot of ways. And it's, it's not easy. And sometimes, somebody says, hey, I really like what you did with this. It goes a long way. When somebody just reaches out to me and is not looking for anything, says, man, I really enjoyed your episode on your podcast. I enjoyed that interview. Man, that was fascinating. They even give me a heart. Man, it makes me want to do the next one better. And so it goes a long way, and moral support goes a long way. A thank you goes a long way. Saying this is awesome, sharing it, or just shooting something on Instagram or Facebook, or if somebody shoots you a message on a Shark of War page, says, love your comic. It fuels you to write the next issue or the next page even better, or get out, the next animation even better. And so obviously I'm encouraging everybody, A, to back, as I stated, back the Kickstarter, but then also, share it on social media and follow on social media. Goes a long way. And having said all that as well, I'm an indie content creator too. And as I stated, you asked for it, indie. I have Buy Me a Coffee. I have a sponsor, and they're making a lot of stuff happen for season 3 already. But again, it's not easy to do this either. So, Buy Me a Coffee. It's very much like Patreon. There's a bunch of cool perks that I have up there, and that goes a long way as well. So definitely support indie content creators, because, without, support, we're not DC, we're not Marvel, we're not Image, we're not big names. Every dollar matters. And obviously, if you're going to back me and Buy Me a Coffee, obviously go check out Shark of War and at least sign for the email list, if not back the Kickstarter, because you should be doing both. You really should. If you do one, you should do both. It's just the way it should be done now. So on that note, I'm going to give you the final word.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time. Please check out my Kickstarter, sow.bitingcomics.com. I think you'll find a lot of stuff there you'll like. If you're a sci-fi fan, if you're a superhero fan, if you're a shark fan, you'll definitely find something you want there. I work really hard to earn your dollar and to maximize the value you get for your money. And I think you'll find my work very interesting. Thank you for your time.
And I think that is a wrap.